Progress.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. First, I congratulate you for the birth anniversary of Imam Reza alayhi salam. And second, we inshallah start. As you remember, the discussion was about whether what is eaten should be an ordinary type of thing that is eaten. Is it necessary to be mu'tad so that it would break the fasting, or anything which is eaten, even if it is not ordinary, is not mu'tad, can cause problem. Mashhur among our scholars is that anything, whether it's muta'araf or غير muta'araf, is a problem. And we said only Sayyid Murtada and Iskafi are people that are considered to be saying that if it is not mu'tad, it's not a problem. Sheikh Irwani himself also inclines more towards the idea of Sayyid Murtada, although because of ihtiyat, he says we should not, swallow or eat anything which is not ordinary, for example, or drink anything which is not ordinary when we are fasting. So we said we can discuss this about muqtadi or about mani, whether there is muqtazi for prohibiting what is not mu'tad, and the other thing is whether there is mani if we suppose that there is muqtadi. Since he didn't accept muqtadi, he questioned the reasons which are mentioned by mashhur. So he has problem with muqtadi, and that's enough. But also, just for the sake of argument, if someone says about mane, that there is no mane, and says that muqtadi is there, let's see if there is mane or there is no mane. So we reached here. Page 329. We said هذا كله من حيث المقتضي وقد اتضح عدم تماميته. This all was about whether there is muqtadi, what requires the hukm to be there, and it became clear that it's not complete. If someone was not present last week, we said we always need muqtadi to be there and mani not to be there, obstacle should. For example, if we want fire, we need to have a burning, for example, wood which has fire, and then we need not to have the piece of wood that we want to now burn it to be wet. If it is wet, although we have fire, it cannot burn it. It's mani. So let us now see what is the situation about mani. وَأَمَّا الْمَانِعُ فَقَدْ يُقَرَّبُ بِوُجُوهٍ. those who say muqtazi is there, but mani is also there, of course the result would be that they would say, then it would be like Sayyid Murtada. If they say mani is mafqud, then the result would be like mashhur. He says, if someone says that akl, whenever is heard, for someone who knows the language, who knows the lugha, when you hear akl, what does come to your mind? Akl, eating, means eating of something which is ordinarily eaten, something which is, by people, at least in some parts of the world, eaten. So they say, da'wa, they claim, انصراف الأكل إلى خصوص المعتاد. انصراف, in usul al-Fiqh, you are familiar. Insaraf is when mind automatically inclines towards a certain meaning or certain example. Okay? It's very much related to the issue of tabatur. So whenever you hear akl is munsarif, means it's automatically leading the mind to what? Khusus al-mu'tad, only those things which are ordinarily eaten, for example. لا لأن المأكول ينصرف إلى ذلك ليقال إن المأكول لم يرد في النصوص. It's not because ma'kul, what is eaten, is munsarif to what is mu'tad, so that someone says we don't have the term ma'kul in the nusus, in the text. We have, for example, we had in the ayah kulu washrabu حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. So kulu washrabu was mantuq, and mafhum was adamu jawaz al-akli wa shurb after fajr. Okay, remember this because we need this issue of mantuq and mafhum. So in this ayah, which is key point for us, and in the hadith that we have, so we don't have the idea of ma'kul, the term ma'kul. So akl itself as a verb, in English we say verb, or we can say masdar in Arabic. As a masdar is munsarif to what can be ordinarily eaten. Like what? Like when we talk about washing clothes which is najis. If someone uses this term, or we hear this term, our mind from hearing washing or ghasl al-thawb al-mutanajjis, our mind goes to what? Washing with what is normal, which is water. Water which is mutlaq, which is not mixed with other things, which is not mudaf. Okay? So from ghasl al-thawb al-mutanajjis, what comes to our mind is ghasl bil-ma. If someone wants to say something else, for example, if someone wants to say, I meant washing with, for example, juice. Okay, he has to mention juice. Otherwise, what we understand from ghasl is washing with water. Here also, what we understand from akl is akl of what is mu'tad. So don't say we don't have term ma'kul. It's not a problem. From akl, like ghasl, we understand that what is used is something which is ordinarily used. وقد نسب العلامة دعوى الانصراف إلى السيد المرتضى. So Sayyid al-Murtada is one of those people who wants to say mani' is mawjood. Therefore, you cannot act upon muqtazi. If you accept that it's muqtazi, mani' is mawjood. Why? Because it is munsarif to mu'tad. Allama Halli in the book Mukhtalaf al-Shi'a says this. احتج السيد المرتضى. This is the text by Allama Halli in Mukhtalaf al-Shi'a. احتج السيد المرتضى بأن تحريم الأكل والشرب أنما ينصرف إلى المعتاد. Sayyid Murtada has said that prohibition of eating and drinking would be shifted to what is ordinarily used for eating and drinking. لأنه المتعارف. So what about those which are not ordinary? We don't have any prohibition about them, so they remain mubah. فيبقى الباقي means غير المعتاد على أصل الإباحة. كل شيء لك حلال حتى تعرف أنه حرام. I am fasting. Food is haram. I know that. Drinking water, juice is haram. I know that. But if soil or I don't know leaves of some trees which are not normally eaten, if I take a little of that, is it haram or not? Sayyid Murtada says we don't have argument here or proof for it, because even if we say there is muqtazi, mani' is mawjood for that muqtazi. Mani' is insaraf. Sheikh Irwani says this insaraf that you are claiming, is it because of mantuq or mafhum? For example, in the ayah, kulu washrabu. Is it that in the lafz, in what is spoken, there is insaraf, or in mafhum, there is insaraf? Then he ends up saying that in none of them there is such a thing, because it's not about fasting. And he says, mantuq is about permission for eating and drinking, and then mafhum is about prohibition, but mafhum follows mantuq in its se'e and ziq, in its extent of being wide or limited. Mafhum follows mantuq. Let us see what he says. وفيه إن كان المدعى انصراف منطوق الآية. If the claim of Sayyid Murtada rahmatullah alayh is that mantuq of ayah, the meaning which is spoken, is munsarif to mu'tad, he says we don't have issue with the result. Yes, we agreed. Kulu washrabu is about mu'tad, but not because of insaraf. Because there is no way to say kulu washrabu means eat and drink something like plaster, it says jas, or for example, soil, etc. It's clear. We don't need to use insaraf. But it has nothing to do with our discussion about fasting. فهو منحصر بذلك جزمان. So mantuq of ayah kulu washrabu certainly is about mu'tad without a need for claiming insaraf. إذ لا يحتمل كون الترخيص شاملا لمثل الجس والتراب ونحوهما. Because there is no possibility that someone says kulu washrabu means kulu washrabu everything, food which is mu'tad or plaster, soil, etc. So without insaraf we already agree, but the issue is إلا أن هذا الانحصار في المنطوق لا ينفع. This being limited and restricted to what is mu'tad in the spoken meaning is not beneficial. Why? Because it's not about prohibition. It's not about fasting, it's about before fasting. وَالَّذِي يَنْفَعُ, what can benefit you in this discussion is to say that mafhum is munhasir. Mafhum means عدم جواز الأكل والشرب بعد الفجر. So إن كان المدعى انصراف مفهومها يعني مفهوم الآية فهو متفرع على المنطوق. Mafhum, as I said, follows mantuq in extent of being wide or limited. So, since in mantuq we didn't need insiraf, and we said it's already known that kulu washrabu means for mu'tad, in mafhum also we don't need insiraf. Yes, mafhum is also limited to what mantuq is limited to, which is mu'tad. حيث أن المندوغ ضيق فكذلك المفهوم, but without انصراف. وعليه فضيق المفهوم ليس للانصراف بل لأنه في نفسه ضيق. Because kulu washrabu certainly is about mu'tad, so the mafhum is also about kulu washrabu, but just after fajr we say there is no permission. This was one way of looking at this issue, to claim that it's munsarif to mu'tad, so ghayrul mu'tad is not a problem. The second way is ما في الجواهر وغيره. جواهر الكلام, صاحب جواهر has argued, and also in other books, other authors. من دعوى تقييد نهي الآية الكريمة الذي هو مطلق لعدم ذكر متعلق الأكل والشرب بصحيحة ابن مسلم, يعني محمد ibn Muslim المتقدمة. Here, instead of talking about insiraf, they talk about taqyid and itlaq. So Sahib Jawahir and people like him, they say in the ayah kulu washrabu حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. كلوا واشربوا has no متعلق, no مفعول. Yeah, there is no object here. كلوا what? واشربوا what? It's مطلق. Okay? So, Sahib Jawar says we do taqyid. Because when ayah is and we have authentic hadith which is mentioning some qaid, some modifications, we do taqyid. Doesn't need to have two ayah. It can be ayah which is mutlaq and hadith which is muqayyad, no problem. Or ayah is hadith is khas. The main thing is that hadith should be reliable. So Sahih ibn Muslim, we had it at the beginning of this discussion, was page 327. 327, if you remember in the bottom, الثاني صحيحة محمد ibn Muslim عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام لا يضر الصائم ما صنعه إذا اجتنب ثلاث خصال. The first was about eating and drinking, الطعام والشراب. The second was about marital relation. The third was to immerse in water. So, الطعام والشراب. Ayah talks about akl and shurb in a general way, in a mutlaq way. But here there is mention of ta'am. What is ta'am? What do you understand from ta'am? Something which is ordinarily used as food. Sharab, what is not ordinarily used as drink. So Sahib Jawahir wants to do taqyid with the help of this hadith, for example. So we go back to the text. من دعوى تقييد نهي الآية الكريمة الذي هو مطلق. Ayah in itself is mutlaq. Why? Because كلوا واشربوا without any متعلق and مفعول لعدم ذكر متعلق الأكل والشرب. So he wants to do taqyid of ayah. The nahi which is in ayah is being restricted بصحيحة ابن مسلم, by Sahih ibn Muslim, which was mentioned before. لعدم الصدق الأكل والشراب الواردين فيها, because in Sahih Muhammad ibn Muslim we had ta'am and sharab, and that cannot be applicable except to what is mu'tad. وهي على هذا تدل على أن اللازم على الصائم اجتناب خصوص المعتاد لا مطلقا. So this person also wants to say, people like Sahib Jawahir, that there is maybe muqtazi, but mani' is not mafqood. So we should limit it to mu'tad. Sheikh Irwani says, as we said before, kulu washrabu is dayiq by itself, and there is no proof that there is itlaq. Kulu washrabu. Who said it has to be, what they say, that it's general, and then we do taqyid, mu'tad and ghayr al-mu'tad. He says, أن التقييد فرع ثبوت الإطلاق. You have to first establish that there is itlaq in ayah, and then you say taqyid. We don't accept there is itlaq. We may say that it's limited to what is ordinarily eaten, because kulu washrabu means something which is eaten, not turab. So in the same way that we said to say the Murtada, there is no need for insaraf because in itself is dayiq. Here also we say to Sahib Jawahir, there is no need for taqid because in itself is dayiq. So this is one point. مضافا إلى عدم الجزم بأن المراد من الطعام والشراب نفس المطعوم والمشروب. He wants to say something here that I personally have difficulty with his claim. He says in Sahih Muhammad ibn Muslim, we said that as long as the one who is sa'im avoids few things, three things in particular were mentioned, it's okay. And one was, ta'am and sharab. He says, why you say ta'am means what is eaten. Ta'am means food and sharab means drink. Maybe ta'am is used here to refer to the action, to the verb. Ta'am meaning aklu ta'am. Sharab meaning shurbu sharab. You may say, do we have such things in the Quran? He says, like this ayah, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. He says, this here, ta'am, maybe means ala, for example, akl al-miskin or it'am al-miskin. Not just ta'am. Or huwa alladhi anzala min as-sama'i ma'an lakum minhu sharabun. He says it means from that water which comes from the sky, you drink. I am not myself very sure about this concept that he is using, because to me it seems that if you go back to Sahih Muhammad ibn Muslim, let us go back to the text of Sahih Muhammad ibn Muslim, because I've been reflecting on this today also and last week. We say لا يضر الصائم ما صنع إذا اجتنب ثلاث خصال الطعام والشراب. It's very difficult to say at-ta'am means akil, والشراب means shurb. With respect to water, because shurb is already mentioned, it says al-irtimasa fil ma, action is used. But for ta'am and sharab, action is not used. So it's very difficult to say this is akil and shurb. It seems that it's ta'am and sharab. Of course, we know that ta'am by itself is not a problem. It means for a sa'im to take it, to eat it, or to drink it is a problem. Anyway, this is his claim. He says there is a possibility that this maybe means akl and shurb, and even possibility is enough to make this argument weak, because ulama say إذا جاء الاحتمال بطل al-Istidlali. If someone argues from an ayah or hadith and you can show that this is not the only valid interpretation, if you can show that there is another valid interpretation possible, just to say it's possible, إذا جاء الاحتمال بطل al-Istidlali, because that person has to show that this is the only way to understand ayah. So in fiqh, you cannot say this is a valid understanding and based on that I give fatwa. No, you have to show that this is the only valid understanding, even if it is zuhur, because zuhur, although exists and the other meaning can be also likely, but that ihtimal is not important. Urf doesn't pay attention to ma'na which is opposite to ma'na zahiri. This is enough. Doesn't need to be nas. But you have to show that this is zahir or nas. If you show that, for example, there is possibility of this interpretation, you bring shawahid, evidence from other cases, you say this interpretation is possible. Another person says this interpretation is also possible. Even he may say, okay, 60% what you say is possible, but 40% mine, or 70% yours, 30% mine. Still, it's not an issue. So you can only argue if there is no other valid interpretation. So he says, we can say perhaps ta'am and sharab here means ma'na al-masdar, yani taking food and taking drink, ومعه يتردد المعنى بين الاحتمالين. Then there will be two possibilities. وتصبح الصحيح مجملة. Sahih becomes mujmal. Then if we accept that ayah has itlaq, there is nothing to stand against the itlaq. There is no muqayyad. If you accept that it is mutlaq. Okay? Then he says, Ba'dul A'lam. It seems he's referring to Ayatollah Khuwi Rahmatullah alayhi. Have said that أن الصحيحة ليست في صدد بيان أن الطعام بخصوصه مفطر ليستفاد الاختصاص بالمعتاد. This Sahih Ibn Muslim was not said with this intention, because very important what the speaker wants to explain. Qasd bayan. What does he want to explain? This Sahih was not said in order to explain that only food makes fasting void. so that we can say, okay, now which food? Mu'tad or غير المعتاد? Here the discussion was to say that among actions like eating, sleeping, walking, eating is a problem. Walking is not a problem. Sleeping is not a problem. He says, إنما ذكر في مقابل سائر الأفعال من النوم والمشي وغيرهما كأنها تقول, as if it was to say, إن سائر الأفعال ليست مفطرة. As long as you avoid these things that we mentioned, other things are not a problem. بينما الطعام مفطر. So, according to this view, what is meant to be explained is that ta'am is an issue, in contrast to some other actions. But what details about ta'am we can understand? This hadith was not trying to explain those details. It was not, بصدد البيان للتفاصيل. أما أن المفطر خصوص الطعام فليست بصدد بيانه. لعل المفطر مطلق المأكول. Maybe what breaks is anything which is eaten, not just ta'am. It doesn't want to say it has to be ta'am only. The extent was not meant to be explained. Just know that eating is an issue and other things are not issue. إنما خص الطعام بالذكر. Then you say, okay, so why ta'am was mentioned? So because most of the time when people do akl, it's with ta'am. لأنه أبرز مصادق المأكول. خب, again, if we accept that there is such a possibility, then the riwayah becomes mujmal. Why? Because جعل احتمال, a second interpretation is possible. مع هذا الاحتمال تعود الرواية مجملة, and when riwayah is mujmala, then cannot do taqeed. Even if it is sahiha, because sahiha is about validity, but dalala must also be complete. So itlaq remains in its place. ولا يعود مانع من التمسك بالإطلاق. But he says this point in general is good, that we have to see what the speaker wants to explain. Should be بصدد البيان. But it doesn't come here. Why? Because the title of ta'am is mentioned here. If you were going to talk about some details other than the essence of ta'am, yes, but essence is included. You cannot say something and then you say, I didn't mean this. You can say something and then when someone asks about details, you say, I didn't mean. A very famous example is this. Allah says in the Quran, Kulu mimma amsakna. If there are dogs which are trained for hunting, we call them kilab mu'allama. Mu'allama means they are taught. There's the issue, if these dogs which are trained for hunting, they hunt, can this animal be eaten or not? Ayah says yes, it can be eaten. Now, without washing, because dog now has, touched this, is it not najis? Blood, of course, outside blood should be washed, but maybe this dog has, with his teeth, been biting, etc. Someone may say, ayah says, this is kulu mimma amsakna, this is halal, this is okay. We say, ayah was not بصدد بيان القيود كلها. Ayah was not going to explain every detail. Ayah had only one concern. This is not mita. This is not mita. This is like dhabiha. Means it is halal. But whether it is najis or not is not part of the conversation. Okay? So, but dog should be dog. So here he says, أن هذا يصلح كوجه لعدم التمسك بإطلاق الطعام من حيث القيود الأخرى لا لعدم مدخلية عنوان الطعام. This is a good point. If someone wants to say this ayah is mutlaq about other quyud, we say no, ayah is, because one of the muqaddamatul hikmah is that mutakallim should be basadad al-bayan for this qaid. And if he has not mentioned, so means it's not meant. But here, if there are details that are not meant, we cannot say there is itlaq. But what about title of ta'am? Essence of, like dog. Can we say dog was not meant to be dog? No. لا لعدم مدخلية عنوان الطعام. Okay, they just sent me a text message that our program is starting, inshallah, and I don't want also to take more of your time. Very sorry for today. We had to rearrange the class. Inshallah, we will continue some more arguments, but at the end, the author's point is that there is no enough reason to say that things which are not ordinarily eaten or used as drink are going to cause problem for fasting. So he cannot give fatwa, but for ihtiyat wajib, we need to avoid, because there is great popularity among our fuqaha. Inshallah, we will continue this discussion bi'iznillah next week. Thank you very much. May Allah bless you, and may Allah inshallah grant your hajat in this blessed night of Milad of Imam Raza alayhi salam. Iltimas dua.
Thank you very much, Sheikh.
Thank you. Iltimas dua. Khuda hafiz.